After the glass of Sancerre shattered on the floor, after the apology, after the blood on the waitress's finger, a voice at table 14 cut through the silence like a blade drawn across silk. Say it again. Say I'm sorry, again. But this time, get on your knees when you say it. The waitress didn't move. The woman in the ivory dress leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier light, her lips curling into the kind of smile that has nothing to do with joy. I said, "Kneel." Every fork in the room stopped moving. Every conversation died mid-syllable. A busboy near the kitchen door gripped his tray so hard his knuckles went pale. But it was the man sitting directly across from the woman in ivory who mattered. The man who had not spoken. The man whose hand rested flat on the white tablecloth. Fingers perfectly still, the way a man's hand goes still when he is deciding something that cannot be undone. Because the man at table 14 was not a banker. He was not a lawyer. He was not the kind of man whose power fit inside a job title, and he had just watched his fiancée try to break a stranger in public. Even he had a line, and she had just crossed it. Taverna Luce sat on the corner of Merchant and Hollow in the Ashford Mill district, a neighborhood that had spent the last decade pretending it hadn't changed. The old brick facades still stood, but the butcher shops and shoe repair counters behind them had been replaced by wine bars and artisan candle studios that charged $40 for something that smelled like Tuesday morning. The restaurant itself was beautiful in the way that expensive places often are, designed to make you feel underdressed no matter what you wore. Cream-colored walls, dark walnut floors distressed on purpose to look like they had history. Pendant lights hung at precisely calculated heights, low enough to feel intimate, high enough that no one bumped their head. Tables spaced far enough apart to suggest privacy, close enough together that privacy was an illusion. It was the kind of place where the menu didn't list prices and the wine list had a table of contents, where the hostess smiled with professional warmth and the valet remembered your car by its make, not its color. On Saturday nights, the waiting list ran 90 minutes deep, and table 14, the corner booth with the leather banquette and the view of the open kitchen, was not a table you could reserve. It was a table that was given to you. Or it wasn't. Tonight it had been given to Dominic Sava and his fiancée, Cressida Lowell. And the evening had started the way their evenings always started, with Cressida adjusting something, the angle of her water glass, the fold of her napkin, the posture of every person within her gravitational pull, until the world around her matched the image she carried in her head. The image where everything was flawless and where the people who served her flawlessness were invisible until they made a mistake. The waitress assigned to table 14 was named Sable Orinda. She was 26. She had dark auburn hair pulled into a low knot at the base of her neck, secured with 2 bobby pins and a quiet prayer that it would hold through a double shift. Her shoes were the only pair she owned without a hole near the toe. Black non-slip flats she'd bought secondhand from a coworker who quit 3 weeks earlier. Sable had been working at Taverna Luce for 4 months. Before that, a breakfast diner on Caldwell Street that closed without warning on a Wednesday. The owner had taped a note to the door. "Thank you for your loyalty. Final checks will be mailed." They never were. Before the diner, a grocery store. Before that, a daycare center that paid $9.70 an hour, which she'd taken because it meant her son could attend for free. Her son, Oren, 4 years old. Brown eyes so large they made his face look like a question, a laugh that sounded like a handful of coins dropped on a wooden floor. Oren was the reason Sable worked doubles every Saturday and picked up Monday lunch shifts nobody wanted. He was the reason she'd memorized the price of every item on the menu, not because her job required it, but because she calculated what each dish could buy at the grocery store. A $42 sea base was a week of lunches. A $28 appetizer was a new pair of sneakers. Her mother, Vedra, 61 years old and already moving through the world like a woman of 80, Vedra had rheumatoid arthritis in both hands, progressed to the point where she couldn't open jars, couldn't button her own coat, couldn't hold Oren's hand on the walk to preschool without her fingers locking in a position that made the boy look up and say, "Grandma, your hand is doing the thing again." Vedra needed medication that cost $412 a month. Insurance covered part. The rest came from Sable. Or it didn't come at all. And when it didn't come, Vedra's hands got worse, and Sable would come home to find her mother at the kitchen table with her fingers curled into shapes that looked like they were trying to hold something that had already been taken away. Sable carried all of this into Taverna Luce every night the way a river carries sediment, invisibly, constantly, without anyone upstream knowing the weight. She smiled at customers. She recited specials with warmth that made people believe she cared about their dining experience, and she did, because their experience was Oren's breakfast. Their satisfaction was Vedra's medication. Their tips were the difference between a month that worked and a month that didn't. Tonight she'd arrived at 5:30, checked her section, polished glasses, restocked the side station. The bartender Ivo told her table 14 was a VIP seating and she should be sharp. She nodded. She was always sharp. There was no version of her life that allowed for a bad night. At 7:15, Dominic Sava and Cressida Lowell were seated. Sable approached with 2 leather-bound menus and her best professional smile. "Good evening. Welcome to Taverna Luce. Can I start you with something from the bar?" Cressida didn't look up. She was adjusting the candle on the table, moving it a 1/4 inch to the left, as if its position were a personal insult. "The Sancerre," Cressida said. "And make sure it's actually cold this time. Last time we were here it was practically room temperature." Sable had never served this woman before. There was no last time. But she'd learned long ago that correcting a customer like this was an invitation to a fight she couldn't afford to lose. "Of course. I'll make sure it's perfectly chilled." Dominic looked at Sable for the first time. He ordered a Negroni. His voice was quiet, unhurried, carrying the quality of a man who had never in his life needed to raise it to be heard. He said thank you. Cressida did not. And so the evening began. The first complaint came 8 minutes after the wine was poured. "This glass has a smudge." Sable looked at the glass. It didn't have a smudge. It had a faint watermark near the base, invisible unless you tilted it at a specific angle under direct light, which is exactly what Cressida had done, rotating it slowly like a jeweler inspecting a stone for fractures until she found what she was looking for. "I'm so sorry," Sable said. "I'll replace it immediately." She brought a new glass, poured the wine again. Cressida watched the pour with the attention most people reserve for surgical procedures, tracking the angle of the bottle, the speed of the liquid, the exact moment Sable's wrist turned to stop the flow. "That's too much." It was a standard 5-ounce pour. Sable had measured thousands of them, but she smiled. "I can adjust that. Would you prefer a lighter pour?" "I'd prefer someone who knows what they're doing." The second complaint came with the appetizers. The burrata was too soft. Burrata, by definition, is soft. That is the entire point of burrata. But Cressida pressed her fork into the center of it with theatrical disgust, as if the cheese had personally offended her ancestry. "This is inedible. Take it back." Sable took the plate, walked to the kitchen, set the burrata on the return station, and stood there for 4 seconds with her hands flat on the stainless steel counter, breathing. 4 seconds. That was what she allowed herself. 4 seconds to feel the heat climb up her neck and the pressure build behind her eyes before she pushed it all back down into the place where she kept everything that couldn't be expressed on a restaurant floor. The entrees arrived at 8:40. Cressida had ordered the branzino, deboned, sauce on the side, vegetables cooked but not soft, plate warmed but not hot. Sable had relayed every modification to the kitchen with the precision of someone transmitting coordinates during an operation. The chef, Bojan, who had worked the line for 22 years and had the burn scars to prove it, had looked at the ticket and muttered something in Serbian that Sable suspected was not a compliment. The branzino was perfect. Bojan did not make imperfect plates. He had too much pride and too little patience for anything less. Cressida cut into the fish. One bite. She set her fork down. There's a bone. Near the edge of the fillet there was a translucent sliver of cartilage smaller than a grain of rice, the kind that exists in every piece of branzino ever served in the history of cooking, and the kind you would never notice unless you were searching for a reason to be unhappy. But Cressida had found her reason, and the look on her face said she had been looking for it all night. I'd like to speak to your manager, and I want this meal comped. Her voice rose just enough to be heard at the surrounding tables while maintaining the posture and diction of someone who believed herself to be the victim. It was a performance, polished, practiced, and devastating. I come here expecting a certain standard. I'm wearing a dress that costs more than you make in a month, and you serve me a fish with bones in it, after the smudged glass, after the burrata that looked like it had been sitting out since lunch. What exactly am I paying for? The surrounding tables had gone quiet. The busboy near the kitchen door, Pavo, stood frozen with a bin of dirty dishes in his arms. The hostess looked down at her reservation book, as if the answer to what was happening might be written between the 8 o'clock seatings. Sable stood perfectly still. Her hands, hidden at her sides, were trembling. Not from fear. From the effort of keeping everything inside, the rent 11 days late, the medication refill Vedra needed by Tuesday, Oren's preschool paid in fragments, $50 here, $30 there, always with the same apologetic email to the director. The car making a grinding noise 3 days ago she couldn't afford to diagnose. All of it pressed against the back of her teeth while she stood in front of a woman who had just announced to an entire restaurant that her dress was worth more than Sable's life. I sincerely apologize for the experience tonight, Sable said. Her voice didn't waver. I'll get the manager for you right away. She turned to walk toward the back. And that was when Cressida said the thing that changed the evening, and perhaps changed everything that came after it. Pick up the glass. Sable stopped. The wine glass. The one I set on the edge of the table. It fell when you turned around. Pick it up. The Sancerre glass was on the floor near her left foot, cracked at the stem, wine spreading in a pale pool across the dark walnut. She had not knocked it over. She had not touched the table. The glass had been placed on the outermost edge by Cressida herself, balanced on less than a quarter-inch of surface, waiting to fall. Staged. Sable bent down. A shard nicked her index finger. A thin line of blood appeared, bright against her skin. She didn't react. She placed the broken pieces on her tray and straightened up. Now apologize, Cressida said. Look at me and say you're sorry for ruining my evening. Say it like you mean it. 46 people across 23 tables were watching a woman in an ivory dress dismantle another woman piece by piece. Some looked away. Most didn't. Because cruelty, when it happens in public, has a gravity that pulls the eye even when the conscience says, don't look. I'm sorry, Sable said, looking directly at Cressida. I'm sorry your evening was not what you expected. But it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough, because what Cressida wanted was not an apology. What she wanted was submission. She wanted Sable to shrink. She wanted to watch a woman who had nothing bend before a woman who had everything, and she wanted witnesses. Say it again, Cressida said. Say I'm sorry again, but this time, get on your knees when you say it. The room held its breath. Sable did not move. I said, kneel. And across the table, Dominic Sava set his drink down without a sound. His hand flattened against the tablecloth. His fingers went still. The restaurant waited. The busboy, Pavo, was the first person to move. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other and adjusted the bin of dishes on his hip, and in doing so made a small sound, a ceramic plate sliding against another, that broke the silence just enough for the room to remember that time was still passing. Pavo Kennett was 19. He'd aged out of the foster system 7 months earlier and discovered that the world on the other side of 18 had all the same problems, but none of the same safety nets. He was tall and angular, with a narrow face and ears that stuck out slightly in a way that had earned him years of mockery in group homes, and a strange affection from the kitchen staff, who called him Radar and let him eat whatever the line cooks plated wrong. He'd seen Cressida Lowell before. She came in monthly, always with a different grievance, always with the same pattern of complaint. He'd watched her reduce a sommelier to a stammering apology over a wine that was exactly what she'd ordered. He had a theory about people like her, formed from years of watching adults exercise power over children who couldn't fight back. People who need to make others feel small have never once felt big enough on the inside. But tonight was different. Tonight, Cressida had crossed into something Pavo recognized in his body before his mind named it. The feeling of standing in a hallway while a foster parent's voice got louder. The feeling of knowing the next few seconds would determine whether you slept in a bed tonight or on a floor. He watched the blood on Sable's finger, a single red line that nobody at the surrounding tables could see, but that Pavo saw because he had spent his entire childhood learning to notice the small damages adults tried to conceal. He walked to table 14, set his dish bin down, pulled a clean cloth napkin from his apron and held it out. "You're bleeding," he said, quietly, not to the room, to her. Sable took the napkin. Something moved across her face, fast and raw, a crack in the mask she'd been holding together with nothing but willpower and economic desperation. "Thank you," she whispered. Cressida's eyes snapped to Pavo. "Excuse me, did anyone ask you to come over here?" Pavo looked at her. He didn't look the way he was supposed to. He looked at her the way a boy who had survived 14 foster homes looks at a person who thinks they invented cruelty, with a stillness that said, "I have seen worse than you. I have stood in rooms where the consequences were real, where the bruises lasted weeks. You are performing something I have lived." He didn't say any of that. He was 19 and he needed this job. "Sorry, ma'am. Just saw the broken glass. Wanted to make sure nobody got hurt." "Then clean it up and disappear." He knelt and picked up the shards. As he did, he looked up at Sable one more time. In that look was a recognition, a solidarity between people who have been on the receiving end and understand that the only thing worse than being humiliated is being humiliated while everyone pretends it isn't happening. Cressida leaned back. "I want your name. Full name. I'm going to make sure the owner knows exactly how tonight went. And I'm going to make sure you never work in a place like this again." Sable walked toward the back. Past Ivo, jaw tight at the bar. Past Bojan, arms crossed, a look on his face that involved a deboning knife. Through the swinging door into the service corridor where she pressed both hands against the wall and bent forward and breathed. She didn't cry. She wanted to. Every nerve in her body wanted to collapse. But she couldn't cry because if she cried, her eyes would redden and the manager would see, and he might send her home early and she'd lose 3 hours of Saturday tip-out, which was $60 to $80, which was the grocery run for Sunday morning, which was the food Oren would eat for the next 5 days. So she breathed. She counted to 10. She pressed the napkin tighter against her finger and felt the bright sting of the cut, and used it the way a diver uses cold, as proof she was still here, still standing, still in her body. Then she straightened up, adjusted her apron, and walked back out. While Sable was in the corridor, Dominic Sava had not moved. He sat with his Negroni untouched, his face revealing nothing a neighboring table could read. To the room, he looked like a man waiting for a storm to pass. But Dominic was not waiting for the storm to pass. He was deciding what to do about it. He had been born in Kotor, Montenegro, in a house with blue shutters overlooking the Adriatic. His father, Miroslav, was a fisherman who sold his catch at the morning market and drank away the profit by afternoon. His mother, Tilda, worked in a hotel laundry pressing sheets for tourists who would never know her name. Miroslav hit Tilda. That was the simple version. The longer version was a catalog of escalation that began with open-handed slaps and ended, over 15 years, in systematic cruelty that doesn't make the news because it happens too quietly and too often. He hit her when dinner was wrong, when the boy cried, when the hotel reduced her hours and there was less money for his drinking. Dominic had been 7 the first time he tried to intervene. He stood between his parents and said, "Stop." Miroslav backhanded him across the mouth and told him to go to bed. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and listened to his mother through the wall. She wasn't screaming. She was apologizing. And young Dominic made 2 promises. The first, when he was powerful enough, no one would ever hit his mother again. The second, he would never become a man who needed to make another person feel small in order to feel large. He kept the first promise. At 16, he grabbed Miroslav's wrist mid-swing and the grip said everything the word hadn't at 7. Miroslav left that night. He died 4 years later. Dominic felt nothing. Tilda lived another 20 years. She never asked where Dominic's money came from. She died in her sleep on a Tuesday in March, and Dominic held her hand for 4 hours after the undertaker arrived and thought about the promises he'd made in the dark. He had kept the first one. But sitting in this booth, watching his fiancée hold a bleeding waitress hostage for sport, Dominic understood that he had been failing the second promise for 3 years. Not because he hit anyone. He had never struck a woman. He had constructed his entire emotional life around that boundary, the way a man who grows up near a cliff builds every structure facing inland. But he had chosen Cressida. A woman who did with words what Miroslav had done with fists, who diminished anyone contractually obligated to absorb abuse without retaliation, who made waitresses apologize for things they hadn't done because the submission itself was the point. He had watched it at other restaurants, boutiques, hotel front desks. He had watched Cressida reduce a saleswoman to trembling with a monologue so precisely cruel it could have been rehearsed. And he had done what his neighbors had done when Miroslav hit Tilda. What the hotel manager had done. What every person who could have helped had done. He had looked away. He had told himself it wasn't the same. Words, not fists. Stressed, not dangerous. He had built a lexicon of excuses and stacked them into a wall that let him sit across from this woman without confronting the truth. He had fallen in love with a version of his father. Not the fists. The engine underneath. The need to control. The need to diminish. The belief that other people existed to serve your image of the world, and that when they failed, they deserved to be punished. That was what Dominic saw when Cressida told the waitress to kneel. He saw Miroslav. He saw the kitchen in Kotor. He saw his mother's hands pressing sheets that would never carry her name. The service corridor door swung open. Sable walked back out with her shoulders straight and a clean napkin wrapped around her finger. Dominic watched her cross the room. He watched the composure that cost more than anyone watching would ever know. And the second promise reassembled itself inside his chest like a bone resetting after a fracture. He reached for his phone and sent a single text to a man named Haziel, who had worked with him for 9 years and understood that texts from Dominic without greeting or context were not requests. Stay outside. Don't leave. He put the phone away, straightened his cuffs, and waited for Sable to reach the table. Sable was 4 steps from the booth when Dominic stood up. He stood slowly, with a weight that communicated that whatever was about to happen had been decided at a depth surface reactions couldn't reach. "Where are you going?" Cressida asked. He turned to Sable. "Sit down," he said. Not a command. An offer disguised in 2 words. I. I'm working. Not at this table, not anymore. He turned to Cressida. She's done serving us. Dom, sit down. You're making a scene. No, you made the scene. I'm ending it. Cressida was not accustomed to being contradicted by Dominic, who had spent 3 years navigating her volatility with the practiced detachment of a man who believed silence was the same thing as peace. He looked at Sable again. The cut on your hand. From the glass she put on the edge of the table. Is it deep? The question disoriented her. Of all the things she expected this man to say, it was not concern for a small wound everyone else had already forgotten. It's fine, she said. Dominic recognized the phrase. His mother had said it 1,000 times. It's fine. I'm fine. We're fine. The 3-word fortress women build when the truth is too expensive to speak. You don't have to say that, he said quietly. Not to me. Something in Sable's chest moved. Not broke. Not cracked. Moved. The way a door shifts when the pressure on one side changes. Go take care of your hand, he said. I'll handle the table. Why? The question came out before she could stop it. Because the last time I watched someone stand in front of a person like her and pretend to be fine, I was 7 years old. And I didn't do anything. And she died. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the kind that forms when something true has been said in a room full of performance. Sable looked at his face. She could not categorize it. What she found was not pity, not charity. She found grief. Old grief, carried so long it had become structural. Okay, she said softly and turned toward the corridor. Back at the table, Dominic sat down across from Cressida. What was that? That was me watching you try to make a woman kneel in a public restaurant. She ruined our dinner. She served our dinner. You ruined it. You're defending a waitress over your fiancé? What I saw was you breaking a glass on purpose and blaming her for it. What I saw was you demanding a woman get on her knees for something she didn't do. What I saw, Cressida, was cruelty. And I've been watching it for 3 years and calling it something else. And I'm done. The word done hung between them like a blade suspended by a thread. Cressida went still. For the first time all evening, something behind her eyes shifted. Fear. The specific fear of a person who has built their relational world on the assumption that their partner will always absorb, always look away, and who has just discovered that the absorption has ended. You don't mean that, she said. Dominic reached into his jacket. He pulled out a small velvet box and set it on the tablecloth. The ring, he said. I'd like it back. The restaurant closed at 11. Sable sat on an overturned milk crate in the alley behind Taverna Luce, doing the math she always did after a shift. Estimated take-home, roughly 110. Except table 14 had left no tip. Cressida had walked out first. Dominic had stayed behind, spoken to the manager, a man named Aldrich, in a conversation that lasted less than 3 minutes. Then he'd left in a black car idling at the curb. Sable didn't know that Dominic had paid the full bill, didn't know he'd asked Aldrich a single question. The waitress, Sable. What happens to her after tonight? Didn't know Aldrich had hesitated before answering. She could be let go. Ms. Lowell has a certain influence. Dominic had nodded once. Give me the owner's name. Ronan Vask. Names, once given to Dominic Sava, did not need to be repeated. In the alley, Sable heard footsteps. She tensed. Then she saw the shoes, expensive, dark leather, and looked up to see Dominic standing at the mouth of the alley. He stopped 8 feet away, hands at his sides, posture open. I'm not here to bother you, he said. Then why are you here? Because I think you're about to lose your job, and I don't think you can afford that. No one had ever walked into her life and said the thing that was actually true. I'll be fine, she said. You keep saying that because it keeps being true. It doesn't sound true. It sounds like something you say so people don't look too closely. You don't know me. I know you wrapped half a bread roll in a napkin during service and put it in your apron pocket when you thought nobody was watching. Her face went hot. She'd taken it from a basket being returned to the kitchen. Free and still warm. Oren's breakfast. I'm not judging you. I'm telling you that I noticed. The way you calculated every plate on the menu. The way you checked your phone on break and your shoulders dropped 2 inches. The way you said of course to everything Cressida demanded. Not because you agreed, but because disagreeing is a luxury you can't afford. A car passed on the street. Its headlights swept the brick and disappeared. I have a son, she said. Not because he'd asked, because the wall she'd held up all night had a crack in it now. His name is Oren. He's 4. He thinks I work at a castle because I told him the restaurant has chandeliers. He draws pictures of me wearing a crown. Every morning I braid his hair and he tells me I'm the queen of the castle and I say yes, baby, I am. Her voice faltered. My mother lives with us, Vedra. Arthritis so bad some mornings she can't hold a cup. When I can't cover her medication, she hides her hands under the table so Oren doesn't see. But he sees. Kids always see. Last week he opened a jar of peanut butter for her, and when the lid came off he said, "See, Grandma, I can be your hands." And she cried. And I stood in the hallway and cried too, but quietly, because that's how I cry now. Quietly. So nobody has to carry it but me. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. I make $16 an hour plus tips. Rent is $1,400. Medication is $412. Preschool is $600. By the end of every month I'm borrowing from next month to pay this one. And tonight, your fiancé told me to get on my knees in front of 46 people. And the worst part isn't that she said it. The worst part is that for a half second I almost did it. Because I need this job more than I need my dignity. And that's a sentence no person should ever have to say out loud. Dominic was silent through all of it. He hadn't moved. He hadn't offered a solution or a reassurance. He had given her room, and she had filled it with the truth. Why do you care? Sable asked. You sat at that table all night. You watched her do this to me. Why now? Dominic leaned against the brick wall. My mother's name was Tilda. She pressed sheets in a hotel in Montenegro. Her hands were rough and cracked, and she rubbed them with olive oil every night. And every morning they were cracked again, and she never once complained. He paused. My father drank, and when he drank, he hit her. Enough nights that I learned to read his footsteps the way other kids read books. Heavy steps meant trouble. Light steps meant he'd passed out on the boat. I prayed for light steps every night. Sable's hands had gone still. She used to say, "We're fine, Dominic. Go to bed." And I would hear her through the wall. Not screaming, apologizing. She apologized to the man who was hurting her because somewhere she'd been taught that being hit was something she'd caused. He looked at her. She died carrying it. Not the bruises. Those healed. She carried the apologies. The habit of making herself smaller so someone else could feel large. She carried that until the day she died, and I couldn't take it from her. His voice dropped. I'm not looking away tonight. Not because I'm a good man. I don't know if I am. But because my mother died without anyone ever standing in that gap for her. Without anyone ever saying, you don't have to be fine. You don't have to kneel. You don't have to apologize for existing. I can't go back and say it to her, but I can say it to you. The alley was silent. The bulb above the door hummed. Your mother, Sable said quietly. What was she like? Besides the sheets and the oil? No one had ever asked him that. Every conversation about Tilda had been about what was done to her, never about who she was. She sang, he said, in the mornings, before my father woke up. Old Montenegrin songs while she made coffee. I don't remember the words. Just the sound. It was the only time the house felt safe. Oren sings in the bath, Sable said. Made up songs about dinosaurs and pancakes. It's the only time I stop counting. They looked at each other across the alley. Two people whose lives had been shaped by the same forces, arriving at the same place on the same October night. Dominic made 3 phone calls that night from the front seat of the black car that Haziel had kept idling on Merchant Street. Haziel was a compact, quiet man with a shaved head and the posture of someone who had spent a decade in rooms where posture was the difference between being taken seriously and being carried out. He didn't ask why Dominic had been in an alley for 40 minutes. He didn't ask why Cressida had left the restaurant alone in a cab. He started the engine and waited. The first call was to Ronan Vask, owner of Taverna Luce. Voicemail. 4 sentences. Ronan, this is Dominic Sava. There is a waitress named Sable Orinda on your staff. If she is terminated or disciplined as a result of anything that happened this evening, I will take a personal interest in the future of your business, and you will find that my interest is not the kind that helps. The second was to Leska Dern, a former public defender who now specialized in employment law and the kind of cases involving people ground down by systems designed to be too expensive to fight. She answered on the second ring despite the hour. It's a woman, single mother, 4-year-old son. She's about to be fired because my fiancé humiliated her in public and the owner will fold under pressure. Your fiancé? Former. A pause. Leska processed the word and what it contained. What do you need? Employment protection first. If they fire her, I want wrongful termination on file within 24 hours. Then her broader situation. Mother with a medical condition, barely making rent, preschool in installments. Whatever structures exist, find them and connect her. She has a cut on her right hand, he added, from a wine glass placed on the edge of the table deliberately. If Vask fires her, that cut becomes evidence. Every restaurant in this city has liability insurance, and liability insurance does not enjoy photographs of staff injured by customers who staged the injury. The third call lasted 90 seconds. 1 question and 1 instruction. The question: whether Cressida Lowell was connected to anyone who could interfere with an employment dispute or housing application in the city. The answer, apparently, was yes. The instruction: make sure that doesn't happen. He texted Sable from the car. She'd given him her number in the alley, reluctantly, after he'd said, I'm going to make a call that may help you keep your job. I'll need a way to reach you. If you'd prefer I don't, say so, and I'll leave. She had recited the number carefully, each digit separate, as if the spaces between them were small walls she could rebuild if she needed to. His text was 3 sentences. There's a room at the Haddon Hotel, Suite 408. Yours for the month, no strings, no cost, no name on record. A lawyer named Leska Dern will call you tomorrow morning. Answer the phone. He did not add pleasantries or reassurance, because Dominic understood something about people in survival mode that most people never learn. They don't need comfort. They need facts. They need a door that locks. They need a phone call from someone who knows the law. They need the ground beneath their feet to stop moving long enough to take a single full breath. Sable read the text at 11:52, sitting in her car in the parking lot behind Taverna Luce. Vedra had texted 20 minutes earlier. Oren asleep. He asked for the castle song. I sang it twice. Come home safe. She read Dominic's message 3 times. Started to type I can't accept this and deleted it. Started to type who are you and deleted that too. She sat in the dark car and felt the thing that terrified and disoriented people feel when they have been treading water so long they've forgotten what standing feels like. And someone says here, put your feet down, the bottom is closer than you think. She typed 2 words. Thank you. Then she drove home to her son. Leska Dern called at 7:45 the next morning. She had a voice like a woman who had argued in courtrooms the way marathon runners run, with endurance, with pacing, with the knowledge that the only thing that mattered was not stopping. She asked Sable to tell her everything. And Sable sat at the kitchen table with cold coffee and told Leska things she had never organized into a single narrative: the string of jobs, the diner that closed, the final checks that never came, the preschool payments made in fragments, Vedra's hands, the medication she couldn't always cover. Leska listened without interruption, without the small noises people make to signal empathy when what they really want is for you to finish. Then she spoke. "I'm filing employment protection with Taverna Luce's ownership group this morning. If they terminate you, we have wrongful termination ready. The staged glass, the hostile behavior, the documented injury, Dominic Sava as witness. They won't fight it. It's cheaper to keep you than to defend against it." Sable's hand tightened around the coffee mug. "Second, there's an emergency medical assistance fund for dependents of low-income workers. Your mother qualifies. If we submit by Wednesday, her medication is covered starting next month. All of it." Sable closed her eyes. "Third, a subsidy program for single parents below a certain threshold. You qualify. I've spoken to the preschool director. Your balance will be restructured and the subsidy retroactively covers the last 2 months." She agreed to that? She agreed when I explained the legal framework for discriminatory billing practices against subsidy-eligible parents who were never informed of their eligibility. She agreed quite quickly. Sable pressed her hand against her mouth. Vedra was sitting across the table, watching her daughter with eyes that had seen enough to know when something was shifting. Her arthritic fingers rested on the table, curled in their morning position, the position Oren called the thing. "Leska, I can't pay for—" "You're not paying for anything. This work is covered." "By who?" "By someone who asked me to help you and who I have never once known to be wrong about the people he asks me to help." Ronan Vass called at 9:15. His voice had the quality of a man recently introduced to a version of reality he had not previously considered. Her position was secure, a new protocol for VIP tables. Any customer who engaged in abusive behavior would be asked to leave, regardless of clientele value. And a raise, $4 an hour. She didn't ask who suggested the raise. She knew the suggestion had not been phrased as a suggestion. She hung up and looked at Vedra. "Mama, your medication. It's going to be covered." Vedra's curled fingers pressed against the table as if trying to hold on to the surface of the world. "What do you mean, covered?" "All of it. Starting next month. There's a program. A lawyer found it. It was there the whole time. Nobody told us." Vedra's face opened. The tight composure she wore every day out of habit and necessity loosened at the edges. Her eyes filled. Her mouth trembled. And she said the thing she had been refusing to say for months. "My hands hurt so much, Sable. Every morning. I didn't want to tell you because you carry so much already. But they hurt so much." Sable got up from the table and knelt beside her mother and took those curled, aching hands in her own, gently, the way you hold something precious that has been neglected, and she held them. "I know, Mama. I know they do." From the bedroom doorway, Oren appeared. Dinosaur pajamas, a stuffed octopus with 3 restitched arms, hair wild, brown eyes enormous. "Mommy, why is Grandma crying?" "She's happy, baby." "Happy crying?" "Happy crying." Oren considered this with the grave seriousness of a 4-year-old philosopher. Then he walked over and wrapped his arms around both of them and said, "I can be happy crying too if you want." And Sable laughed. Not the controlled laugh she used on the restaurant floor. A real laugh that started below the ribs and arrived at the mouth tasting like the first free thing she'd had in years. That night, after she'd bathed Oren and braided his hair and sung the castle song twice, After Vedra had gone to bed and the apartment was quiet, she sat on the pull-out couch with the broken spring and read Dominic's text one more time. No strings, no cost, no name on record. She thought about the alley, about a man who had told her about his mother's hands and the olive oil, and the mornings she sang in a house that wasn't safe. About the way he'd stood 8 feet away, giving her the same thing Leska had given her on the phone. Room. She set the phone down. The broken spring pressed into her left hip, a small, sharp reminder that comfort was something that happened to other people. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, the morning didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to walk toward. 4 months later, on a Tuesday in February, Taverna Luce had a different energy. The pendant lights still hung at their calculated heights. The wine list still had a table of contents. But something in the room had changed. The way a room changes when the people inside it know that the rules have shifted, and the shift is permanent. Sable was working the floor. She had a new apron, a dark navy one with her initials embroidered in white thread, a Christmas gift from Evo. She moved through her section with the same warmth, the same grace. But something behind her eyes was different. There was margin now where there hadn't been before, space where there had only been compression. Vedra's medication was fully covered. The application had been approved in 11 days. Her hands would never be fully healed, but the medication had slowed the progression, and on good mornings she could hold Oren's hand on the walk to preschool without her fingers locking. Oren no longer needed to say the thing about Grandma's hand. On those mornings, Vedra held on a little longer than necessary, not because Oren needed steadying, because she could. Oren's preschool was paid. The subsidy had covered the balance and the retroactive months. The director now greeted Sable at drop-off with the particular friendliness of a woman who had been introduced to the concept of legal exposure and decided that warmth was a better investment than formality. Sable had not moved into the Haddon. She had stayed in the studio apartment, because sometimes the thing you've been surviving in becomes the thing you've survived, and leaving it feels less like an upgrade and more like abandoning a foxhole that kept you alive. But the broken spring had been fixed. A repairman had come on a Wednesday, sent by someone whose name Sable didn't ask. He'd replaced the spring, tightened the frame, and left without an invoice. That night, Sable had lain flat on the couch for the first time in 2 years, and the feeling of her spine settling against a surface that didn't fight back had made her press her face into the pillow and breathe in a way she'd forgotten was possible. Like rest. Like permission. Pavo had been promoted to food runner. He stood taller now, because the night he'd walked to table 14 with a napkin and said, "You're bleeding," he had done something 14 foster homes had never given him the chance to do. He had mattered to someone at the exact moment it mattered most. Cressida Lowell had not returned, had not called Ronan Vask, had not filed a complaint or launched the campaign she'd promised. The reasons for her silence were known only to her and, perhaps, to a man whose name had been spoken in a 90-second phone call on a Saturday night. A dark car pulled into the lot behind the restaurant. Inside, Dominic Sava sat with his hands on the wheel. No Haziel, no passenger, just a man in a wool coat watching the back door of a restaurant where, 4 months ago, he had stood in an alley and told a stranger about his mother's hands. He hadn't contacted Sable since that night. After the text, the introduction to Leska, the call to Vask, he had stepped back completely. He understood that the difference between helping and hovering is the same as the difference between opening a door and standing in it. He had opened the door, then walked away from it. Through the glass panel in the service door, he saw Sable. She was carrying 2 plates to a foretop near the window. She set them down and said something to the table. The guests laughed. She smiled. It was not the professional smile he'd seen the night they met. It was real. The kind that starts somewhere that has to feel safe before it sends anything to the surface. His eyes moved to her hands, both steady, unbandaged. The cut on her index finger healed to a thin line nobody in the dining room would ever see. But he knew it was there, and he knew what it meant. He put the car in drive. He did not go inside. He did not send a text. The promise he had made at 7 years old, lying in the dark in Kotor while his mother apologized through the wall, had been kept. Not the way he'd imagined as a boy. Not by saving Tilda. That version died with her on a Tuesday in March. But this version, the one that walked into an alley and said you don't have to be fine, that made 3 phone calls and fixed a couch spring and never once asked for anything in return, this version was alive. And it was enough. He drove east on Merchant Street. The February night was cold and clear. He drove with the window cracked, and the air carried the faint smell of bread from the bakery 2 doors down, the bakery that baked things every morning that not everyone could afford, but that still, every morning, filled the alley with sweetness. He did not look back, because looking back was for men who doubted what they'd done, and Dominic Sava had no doubts. Not about this. Inside the restaurant, Sable paused at the service station and checked her phone. 8:30. Vedra would be giving Oren his bath. He would be singing about the dinosaur who made pancakes. Vedra would be holding his hand, and her fingers would be holding, and the bath water would be warm, and the apartment would smell like soap and steam, and something Sable had only recently begun to recognize. Home. Not a place. A feeling. A door that locks from the inside. A mother whose hands don't hurt as much as they used to. A boy who draws crowns on stick figures and believes his mother is a queen. She picked up 2 menus and walked toward a new table. Not surviving. Not enduring. Not counting. Walking. Just walking. And in a studio apartment on the west side of the city, a 4-year-old boy sat in a bathtub and sang a song about a dinosaur who made pancakes for his friends, and his grandmother held his hand with fingers that didn't lock, and the water was warm, and the door was bolted, and the world outside was cold, but the world inside was not. Not anymore. Not for them. Not tonight.